So if you spend any time at all scrolling through, say, sauce homepages or tech portfolios recently, you know the drill.
Oh, you really do.
It's this age of, I guess, safe design. You see smooth gradients, these subtle little shadows, perfect rounded buttons,
Yeah.
and layouts that are just, they're so clean, but they're also predictable.
And, completely forgettable.
Exactly. It's the digital equivalent of elevator music. It sounds professional, but there's no memorable melody.
Right. And it's the design world prioritizing comfort, maybe standardization. And look, it's efficient, sure, but it leads to what we call the sea of similarity.
The sea of similarity, I like that.
Every platform starts to blend into the next. And if you're a brand trying to make a statement, comfortable homogeneity is, well, it's a death sentence.
Right. Which is exactly why we're here. We've seen these two genuinely bold aesthetic styles that are really trying to punch through that monotony. They're sort of redefining what modern minimalism can even look like in 2025.
We're talking about neo-brutalism and glassmorphism.
Yeah, and they embrace contrast and tension in this way that feels almost, I don't know, architectural.
Well, they're radical opposites, really.
Right.
But the power comes from their friction when you put them together. We've synthesized all your source materials, everything from design manifestos to technical guides, to figure out how to manage that exact friction.
So our mission for this deep dive is for you, whether you're a professional designer, a product manager mapping out a new tool, or, just an insanely curious learner, to figure out how to use these powerful visual tools without creating chaos.
Right, because the core challenge isn't the style itself, it's the intentionality.
Exactly. You can't just go slapping thick black text blocks over frosted glass panels and expect your users to stick around.
You'll just frustrate them. We need to analyze how to make these styles actually serve the user experience. You want to build products that aren't just stunning for a portfolio, but are genuinely memorable and, most importantly, functional.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should start by defining the two combatants, I guess, in this aesthetic arena. We have to get them individually before we see why they belong together. So first up, neo-brutalism.
This is the raw, loud one.
Yeah.
When we talk about brutalism, we're really invoking that architectural style from the 50s and 60s, exposed, concrete, uncompromising structure.
Function over flourish.
Exactly. Functionality over any decorative flourish.
Yeah.
And neo-brutalism online carries that same weight. It's unapologetically in your face.
And when you look at its visual traits, that rawness it's crystal clear. We're talking about big, bold, often monospace type that just jumps off the screen.
Right, and you see these very thick, high-contrast borders separating elements. The layouts are rigid, they're grid-heavy, and they enforce this really strict visual hierarchy.
And almost zero decoration.
Yeah.
It achieves its clarity through just sheer visual force and honesty.
Now, contrast that immediately with glassmorphism. If brutalism is exposed steel and concrete.
Then glassmorphism is, well, it's glass and mist.
Literally. It's sleek, and it's highly layered. The style is often described as the elegant older cousin of skeuomorphism.
Can we just pause there for a second? Because I think for anyone who might be newer to design history,
Oh, absolutely. Good call.
skeuomorphism might be a term they haven't heard. What exactly is it, and how is glassmorphism different?
That's a great question. So, skeuomorphism, it was that whole design philosophy back in the early 2010s where digital elements tried to mimic their real-world counterparts.
Right, like the old Apple Notes app that looked like a yellow legal pad.
Exactly that. Or the bookshelf app that literally had wooden shelves, glassmorphism.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps that idea of visual depth and layering, but it's way cleaner, more abstract. It's not trying to look like a physical thing. It's trying to look like a floating, translucent sheet of glass.
Right. Its traits are all about softness and depth, translucence. You've got these frosted glass effects, heavy background blurs that make things feel like they're floating.
Translucent cards, very subtle light gradients and soft shadows. It's polished, it's modern, and it's actually highly sophisticated in its execution.
So, okay, here's the core conflict. One style is abrasive, high contrast, structurally rigid, flat. The other is soft, layered, low contrast, dynamic. My immediate question is, why on earth would any designer choose to combine these? Isn't that just setting up a visual war?
It looks like a war, but it's intentional tension. And what's so fascinating here is that when they're combined correctly, the contrast is the entire point. It's
Ah.
not about finding a middle ground where they cancel each other out. It's about creating an extreme, structured contrast that makes the entire digital experience genuinely memorable.
So we're moving beyond just visual style here. This is like a psychological statement or a commercial one, right?
Absolutely. The combination achieves something pretty unique in branding, the rawness of brutalism. It
Uh-huh.
establishes authority and confidence. It basically says, we don't need padding or decoration. Our structure speaks for itself.
Okay, get that.
But then, when you introduce glassmorphism on top of that, its polish signals something else. Premium quality, modernity, refinement. And that blend of raw confidence and polished refinement, that's the bridge these vibe-first brands are using to build user trust.
I see. So the brutalist elements handle the hard, attention-grabbing structure, and then the glassmorphic elements handle the delicate, layered interactions, like a hover state or secondary info.
You got it. It's generating visual friction, but it's a friction that guides the eye.
So a brutalist grid might be a thick black line across the page, demanding segmentation.
Exactly. And then a translucent card floats over it, and it uses that background blur to highlight the information in a really sophisticated way, not a jarring way.
But, and this is a huge but, we have to stress this because the source is really hammered at home, this is a high-risk, high-reward approach.
Oh, definitely.
If the site looks cool but feels confusing, people will just, they'll bounce fast.
Hmm.
This design has to serve the underlying structure, otherwise it's all just visual noise.
If the user can't easily tell where to click, or if they're just blinded by all the aesthetic tension, the whole exercise is a failure. Which brings us right to the actionable takeaways. The 7 rules for integrating these two intense styles so they're effective and functional.
Okay, let's slow down and really dive into these 7 rules. This is the map for anyone looking to do this without, alienating their entire user base. And rule number 1 is maybe the most counterintuitive one. Don't start with style.
You absolutely must start with structure. Before you even think about touching a gradient or a heavy border, you need to map your entire user experience. Get those solid wireframes in place.
And there was a great test for this in the research, wasn't there?
The best test, it's this. If your layout doesn't work perfectly in grayscale, no amount of blur or bold type is going to save it. You need that functional architecture before you add the aesthetic flourishes.
But wait a minute, if we spent all this time making sure the wireframe works in grayscale, aren't we just designing those same safe, forgettable interfaces again? Doesn't that kind of defeat the whole purpose of leaning into the neo-brutalist shark value?
That's a great challenge, but here's the difference. The grayscale wireframe forces you to rely only on proximity, size, and layout hierarchy. That's it. Once that functional framework is proven to work, then you bring in the brutalist style, the thick borders, the heavy contrast, to amplify that structure, not to create it.
So the brutalism becomes a high-visibility signpost, not a confusing labyrinth.
Precisely.
That structural idea leads us right into rule 2. Use brutalism for impact, not for chaos. If you just slap those harsh characteristics everywhere, you're just screaming at the user, and eventually, they stop listening.
Right. Brutalist design should anchor the UI. It should be the unmistakable scaffolding. You reserve it for elements that absolutely must grab attention. Your primary headings, clear section separators, and especially the calls to action that demand a click.
Can you give us a really clear visual example of that? Like, what does a successful brutalist CTA look like versus that terminal screen look we want to avoid?
Sure. So instead of a typical rounded button with a subtle hover, a Brutalist CTA might use a thick, squared-off black border. Maybe it has an exaggerated offset shadow that is itself black, not blurred. The visual message is, this is heavy, solid, and important.
And you avoid the full terminal screen look
By making sure your Brutalist elements are balanced by plenty of white space,
Mhm.
let the bold elements breathe. And don't try to force that high contrast onto every single block of text on the page.
Okay, so if that's the foundation, we need to talk about the finish. Rule 3, glass is great, but in layers.
Yes, glassmorphism should never, ever be your entire foundation. A whole screen just feels flimsy. It works best as a deliberate layer on top of something solid.
So its use cases are pretty specific.
Very strategic. Use it to soften modals or overlays, to create that feeling of real-world depth for, say, tooltips, or to add focus to one element by subtly blurring everything behind it.
And speaking of performance, this is where a lot of designers hit a wall, right? Especially on mobile or older devices. There was a big warning in the source material about this.
A huge warning. Absolutely. Those heavy blur effects that define glassmorphism can seriously tank performance on low-power devices. A blur isn't just a simple filter. The system often has to re-render all the layers behind that glass element every single time the screen updates.
So if you have too many large, blurred
You're
elements.
just forcing the GPU to work overtime. Strategic use means limiting the size and the number of these blurred layers. It's crucial.
That is a really important practical note. Okay, moving on to Rule 4, which connects both of these aesthetics. Keep your typography clean and big.
Both styles really thrive on strong type that conveys structure and confidence. Playing it safe with some thin, generic font is just the wrong move here.
You have to go bold.
You have to go bold with your headings, select a robust geometric sans serif to bridge that modern and raw feeling, and make sure your text can breathe with enough white space so those thick borders don't feel claustrophobic.
And central to this rule is the one mandatory check. Always, always test contrast. Typography is the #1 failure point when designers push these boundaries, especially with glassmorphism.
That's where the high-stakes risk is. I mean, you're trying to put light text over a blurred background that might have an image or dynamic color behind it. If that contrast ratio dips too low, the text is unreadable. Doesn't matter how cool the frosted glass looks.
Which brings us to Rule 5, which is where that visual war we talked about usually breaks out. Avoid the visual mashup trap.
Yes, because you're already managing two very high contrast styles. Introducing a third element is almost always a disaster.
What's a classic example of that?
The one we see all the time is designers trying to combine glassmorphism with like rainbow gradients and textured backgrounds. The result is just an immediate visual headache, a migraine for the user.
It's visual indigestion. Or combining brutalism with, I don't know, unstyled elements and chaotic bouncing animations.
The solution is really simple. Pick one style to lead the primary structure, usually brutalism for anchoring, and let the other style support the secondary interactive elements.
Right.
Just commit to one visual voice.
That commitment to clarity flows right into Rule 6. Test accessibility like a pro. Designing edgy visuals is not a license to leave people behind.
No, it's the opposite. It means you have to be even more diligent.
So checking contrast rigorously, especially in those problem areas like white text over a busy blurred background. But it's also about the interaction elements too.
Precisely. Beyond just text, you need to make sure your essential clickable elements, your buttons, are still recognizable as functional objects. They can't be so abstract that they no longer communicate click here. Functional clarity has to dominate the aesthetic choice.
And thankfully, we don't have to guess. The sources pointed to some great tools for this.
You did. We highly recommend using tools like Stark, which is specifically designed for contrast and color blindness checks. Also, running Google Chrome's Lighthouse tool gives you comprehensive accessibility reports. These checks should be non-negotiable.
Plus manual testing with real users.
Always, especially users who rely on screen readers.
And that brings us to the final rule. Rule 7. Motion can bridge the gap. This is like the olive branch between the concrete and the glass. It's how you make the two styles communicate instead of fighting.
It's so true. Micro-interactions are key here. Motion turns the UI into a seamless conversation. It stops it from being just a jarring, shouting match of static contrasts.
So when a user hovers over a Brutalist CTA,
The motion could be a slight, smooth transition that adds a glassmorphic element, maybe a quick softening of the background blur. It shows responsiveness and connection.
and you can use things like framer motion, CSS transitions, or Lottie animations to layer that in. They add these subtle depth changes that make the glass elements feel truly physical and responsive.
Which helps the user understand how the rigid brutalist structure relates to the softer glassmorphic overlay. It's the difference between two static paintings next to each other and a dynamic sculpture where the materials interact depending on how you look at it.
Okay, so now that we know how to use them and manage their tension, the big question is still, when? When should you actually unleash this combination? When does it really shine?
It shines when your brand goal is explicitly to stand out and challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
This whole aesthetic communicates high confidence, a willingness to diverge from the corporate standard. It's for brands where the vibe is, in fact, part of the core product.
So the ideal use cases would be, according to our analysis, things like creative agency websites, designer portfolios, maybe early-stage creative startups.
Or next-gen SaaS tools
Yeah.
that are disrupting an established market. Essentially, vibe-first brands trying to build that complex bridge between a strong aesthetic vibe and consumer trust.
And conversely, there are places where this is just not a good idea, where functional clarity has to win out every time.
Absolutely. This combination is generally unsuitable for high-stakes environments. Think about legal sites, government dashboards, or complex banking apps.
Unless I guess breaking conventions is the specific brand goal. But in places where users are handling money or sensitive information, confusing them, even for a second, just carries too high a cost.
Right, you need clear, straightforward structure over visual friction. The aesthetic choice itself says so much about a brand's positioning. But done right, it proves you don't have to choose between stunning aesthetics and robust accessibility. It can be functional art.
So to bring this all home, designing with neo-brutalism and glassmorphism, it isn't about just chasing trends. It's about finding that purposeful tension between contrast and clarity, between depth and direction. When it's working, you're not just styling cards. You are shaping how people feel and move through your digital space.
And we established that for these designs to really succeed, structure has to precede style. That was tip 1, and performance must be protected, which we hit on with the blur-heavy designs in tip 3.
Which raises this one last provocative question for you, the listener, to mull over. If functionality and performance are the non-negotiable prerequisites for great style, what foundational, non-aesthetic principle-like performance on low-power devices, or that simple grayscale wireframe rule, do you think is most often silently sacrificed today when designers are chasing stunning visual trends? It's the silent killer of cutting-edge design.